I think diplomacy fundamentally is about people understanding one another. It is knowing your brief well enough to talk to another person about it, to take the time to learn what their brief is, restate it to them so we know we have a mutual understanding and a mutual respect, and then going for the things your country needs you to get.
And what do our diplomats do?
Our diplomats are out there every day in every way, walking the walk, talking the talk, presenting America from the sort of 35,000-foot level in high-level meetings and negotiations to being a good neighbor somewhere in country X, Y, or Z where they're assigned, and making sure people understand what real Americans are like. Some people are very fond of saying that when diplomacy fails is when we go to war. In fact, I think that the relationship between the two is much more complicated than that. And it goes back once again to what is good for our country, what are the interests of our country, at what point do we have to protect our American citizens who are on the ground in a place like Grenada, and at what point, sadly, does it come to be the case that force needs to be used because it is the only thing somebody else understands? It's really, that's a great question, because I'm here to talk a little bit to you today about consular work. And one of the things that we know as consular professionals is that's one of the first kinds of conversations we have had. First consular officer, if you will, or the first consul named back in 1790. How many years later did we get a president of our country? So one of the things that we talked first about to others was trade. And how did we do that? We had sort of a fledgling merchant marine corps. And when you have sailors going all around the world, you need consuls to do things to protect them and their rights. So sort of from the beginning of time, the consular nature of our diplomatic efforts has always been to make sure different bureaucracies can talk to each other and we protect American interests along the way. The primary reason to have consular officers is to protect Americans and their interests overseas. In the post-9/11 world, and with an ever-increasing interest in security, the Consular Affairs Bureau and consular professionals around the world also have become an integral part of the security team of America, because the other two major issues to which consular officers dedicate themselves are the adjudication of passports and their appropriate adjudication, only an American citizen can have one, to the adjudication of visas and the decisions as to who has the right to come to the United States. And those are both profoundly important issues, not always easy questions, and something that requires you to know a lot about our law and a lot about the country that you're serving in. And so consular, again, first and foremost, protection of American citizens and their interests, and then the appropriate adjudication of passports and visas. Essentially, we are also the first public face of America, and we remind our officers every day that the first person a foreigner who wishes to visit America sees is a consular officer. What we're doing is talking literally to millions of people annually who want to come to the United States for business, for pleasure, perhaps as a student, and we need to know as much as we can about that person and that application in order to make the best decision possible. Of course, it's a multi-tiered approach, so you also have an interview at a port of entry, at a U.S. airport or a land border, but we are the very first to see them, and we are in fact the ones who most assuredly know a little bit more about the society that we're all living in at that moment. If you are in Kazakhstan, you speak the language, you're speaking to that person, you understand a little bit about what might be the push or pull factors. Why do they want to come to America? Will they go home again after this trip? You can talk about the economy, you can talk about reasons for their desire to come here and make sort of an informed decision as to whether or not that whole story holds together. Will they do what they say they're going to do in the States? It's obviously not foolproof, but we do our very best to be as prepared as we can be, and we pull together a lot of different resources from other parts of the government to make sure that we have as much information as possible before we issue that visa, or decide not to issue a visa. Consular Affairs since the mid-90s has been fee-funded. So I think I am accurate in saying there are no tax dollars at this point that go into consular affairs. In fact, we charge fees for a number of services that we provide, again, across the board for American citizen services of some kinds, for visas and for passports. And so that money is, in some instances, retained by the Bureau and plowed right back into what we do. Other parts of it go back to the General Treasury. So it, for many years, when I was Assistant Secretary, we were bringing in a couple of $1 billion a year. It's got to be more than that at this point. And so Consular Affairs is well placed to call on the resources and deploy them appropriately. I loved every minute of my Foreign Service career. I think that you're absolutely right, that people do make sacrifices on a regular basis. I think, of course, now where people are unaccompanied, where they go to a war zone or a difficult post and they leave their family, their spouse and their children behind for a period of time, be it a year or longer. Having said that, I think at the end of the day that the privilege of representing our country abroad is extreme and unique. So at the end of the day, anything that any of us is asked to do is the price of admission for an unparalleled opportunity to do good work and to hopefully be good at it. And on a personal basis, while I can think of any number of times where I maybe wasn't where I wanted to be when I wanted to be there, it is far more often the case where I pinched myself and thought, my gosh, how lucky can I get to be doing this job at this time in this place? On the values side, we live our lives. We understand sort of the formalized talking points that we might get or that we might deploy from time to time, but I think it is much more important for us to be seen to be what we are. People who are interested in sort of a level playing field and fair play and respect for the rule of law. And we behave accordingly, both in the embassy, on a formal call at a foreign mission or ministry, and certainly in our own neighborhoods as we try to be the best residents of the countries to which we are assigned as possible. With respect to the other side of it, protection of American citizens, my goodness, Consular Affairs has been around for a very long time. The thing that is most useful, I think, when you try and think about what do Consular Affairs encompass, is that our work encompasses the cycle of life, the very cycle of life. On any given day in a consular officer's inbox, you can find he or she adjudicating the prospective citizenship of a brand spanking new American citizen born to American parents abroad. And the very next thing you might turn out to do might be helping a family through that difficult moment when a loved one, an American citizen, has died abroad, and you are either helping to arrange the return of those remains to the United States, or you are dealing with the estate. And everything in between. What does everything encompass? I will miss some. I will miss many, because if I had a nickel for every time somebody ever came into my office and said, "You won't believe what just happened to me," that'd be a new example. But international child abduction, adoption issues near and dear to American hearts, marriage, arrest, illness, sort of detention for some unknown reason, evacuation in a wartime situation or because there has been a natural disaster, responses to a plane crash, voter registration, you name it, it goes on and on, notarial services. We are, in many instances, the go-to place for an American citizen who has bumped up against a problem or a challenge in a foreign land and doesn't understand it. And we do our jobs best when we know local law enforcement, maybe somebody at the local hospital, certainly a hotel owner who is willing to give an American citizen sort of a clean bed for a night because the consul calls and says, "We're good for this in the morning, just take care of them tonight." If you're robbed on the Champs-Élysées one day and you don't have anything, it's good if I'm the consul and I know every American franchise out there, because it's not the night that you want to eat escargot. It's the night you want me to be able to say to you, the McDonald's on such and such a corner will give you a meal tonight. We're good for it. It is helping to sort of bridge the gap between what has happened to them and their understanding or misunderstanding of what has happened, and whatever social service or safety net might be available in a foreign country to which they might not normally have access, except for us. We build the most basic and elemental bridges to step in and help American citizens in distress. Oh my gosh, sure, there are tons of them. Let's see. 2004, the tsunami. This is a story that encompasses what we do in Washington as well as overseas. We put a task force together here because tsunami strikes, people are worried about their friends, families, and loved ones. And so that task force of lots of different people from the department with a consular component received 35,000 phone calls in a matter of about 4 or 5 days. And those phone calls related to 15,034 American citizens people were concerned about. And the phone calls range. These are all from my memory. I happened to answer a phone from a woman who said, "My family is in Quito. Are they all right?" My kind of question, actually, because I can answer that one right away, and this one's closed, right? No, ma'am, the tsunami didn't strike Quito, Ecuador. I'm sure that your family is fine, or at a minimum, they're unaffected by this particular challenge, right? To the woman, also a call I took, who told me that she had not talked to her daughter in 2 years. But the last time they spoke, her daughter lived in Phuket, which is pretty much ground zero for the tsunami. We found the daughter right away, and she was living in the United States. One of my team members talked to the daughter, who did not want her mother to know where she was, but was okay with us calling mom back and saying, she's okay. So you're touching people's lives every day, and one of the things about consular work is you're also getting touched back. When that tsunami struck, there happened to be a couple of officers at the beach at Phuket. And what did they do first? Put their families on a plane back to Bangkok, set up a little table with an American flag on it. One of them sat at the table, the other went out and started looking for American survivors. That's the kind of thing we do everywhere. We are the lifeblood, I think, of the organization when it comes to regular old American citizens who may not know what our policy is on X, Y, or Z sort of matter at any given time, but who know that calling their consul in a time of need is going to result in something hopefully helpful to them, and certainly is going to help them understand the situation better. Fundamental changes were made because of the 9/11 attacks. On the one hand, one of the things we didn't know right away was whether or not we would become part of the Department of Homeland Security. Secretary Powell was very convinced that that should not occur for a couple of different reasons, but one of them, and the one that we naturally gravitated toward, is the fact that we wanted to make sure that the whole question of visa adjudication did not become one that became something akin to a law enforcement interrogation rather than the kind of conversation it had been. Did we need more information from other agencies than we ever had before? Yes, and the 9/11 Commission certainly proved that and supported that notion, and that changed. Information sharing among agencies government-wide and with us in particular ballooned almost overnight, so that we had to create new systems to be able to assure we received it, to be assured that we could access it well and use it in real time in interviews. That all happened. But one of the critical elements for us, and Secretary Powell was just terrific on this, was that he knew what we knew, that if we put a big wall up around that process, if we deterred people from applying for visas, we were letting the bad guys win. The best commercial for America is America. I remember a prominent American university saw a number of Saudi students leave mid-semester. They went home. And I thought to myself, as I read in a paper, that the response by this university was to create a distance learning program. It was a great idea because these kids at least could finish their semester that way. But it was a sad thing to think about these young men and women home because they think we feared them or we disliked them or had a stronger antipathy toward them than that. At the end of the day, what you really want are those young people to come to this country. And Powell would talk to us about it, and I would go out and talk to consuls all over the world about this. Because what do you know when you get a young person on an American college campus? They spend a year or 2 or 3 or their whole undergraduate experience here with us. And they see the good and the bad, and they form their own opinions. But I am convinced that having had that experience, they go home again, and they become parents, civic, social, religious, business leaders in their own countries. And they become the best diplomats, the best ambassadors that we have. That's part of what Secretary Powell wanted to preserve in working with Governor Ridge to keep the visa function with the Department of State. He also realized that, as he said I saw him say to Secretary Ridge, that's part of my shock troops. We bring people in. The entire Foreign Service has a consular tour, and some of them stay and become consular professionals, and others go off in other directions. But this is an important part of the formative experience which we all need to have. So lots of other changes, but I'll stop there in case you have a follow-up. Another tough one, because you see us wanting. Every Foreign Service officer I know joined the Foreign Service at least in part because they want to get out there. We have a curiosity about other countries, other cultures. We study languages so that we can understand people in their own language, not through an interpreter. And yet at the end of the day, we also know that the bureaucracy of Washington has a very strong desire for us to be sort of safe and sound where we are. I respect that. But it is also the case, I think, that we do a slight disservice in not speaking to the American people about the fact that there is risk. If we're parents, we teach our children to look both ways before they cross the street. When we're grown-ups, we need to be aware of our surroundings in exactly the same way. I don't know a Foreign Service officer who has ever said, I won't risk. What they do say is, I will be as well informed as I can be before I then do my job. Let me do my job. So it is a balance in which we have to recognize that one size does not fit all. Every situation is different. And I have just a profound respect for the Bureau of Diplomatic Security and the security professionals at the Department of State. They are colleagues, they are friends, they are top-notch professionals. What it requires is a conversation rather than a knee-jerk reaction, and in most of my career, they have been conversations. Where you go, what you do, how you do it. None of us wants to become a needless or senseless statistic or a cautionary tale for those who follow. But all of us want to be the best we can be at our jobs, to get the information, to share information, to be out there in the world representing America. Some people don't like it when I say this, but the student industry, to go back to the conversation about foreign students in this country, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Okay? If we lose those students to other countries, we are not only losing the opportunity to have them come, spend time with us, learn about us, and then go home again and talk about us positively, we hope. But we lose that infusion, not only of tuition, but of every bit of a living and learning expense that somebody has here. During the years that I was Assistant Secretary for Consular Affairs, 2002 to 2008, the statistic that I used very routinely was that 1 in every 8 Americans was involved in some aspect of the travel and tourism industry. That might be a very direct nexus. You're flying the plane home. It might be a somewhat less direct nexus. But at the end of the day, that too is a multi-billion-dollar industry. If we say, out of an abundance of caution, no to every person who wants to come to America, to the millions of people who come here every year, we just say no, those industries dry up in a major way. So it is important to us, again, to do our jobs to the best degree possible, to make sure that we are using all of the information other agencies have shared with us, but then to have the courage to say, we work every day to strike a balance between secure borders and open doors, to make sure that those who can come here do come here, want to come here, because this is a place where not only will we prosper from their being here, but we will prosper a second time when they go home again having had a positive iteration here. It's jobs, jobs, jobs in a big way. I don't have a personal story, but I can think every day about what comes to mind immediately for me is our embassy in the Dominican Republic and how many baseball player stories they have on a regular basis. I think that if you've been a vice consul in in the Dominican Republic, you are a baseball fan forever, because there are so many connections between American baseball and the Dominican Republic. It's just one example, but that's a fun one, and I can think of a lot of people for life having made friends with baseball players. Also a tough question. I think a little bit earlier I talked about us not doing as good a job as I think we should or could, educating America about the risk or the inherent risks in serving your country abroad. We wear a different uniform than our colleagues in the armed forces, but it is no less important that people understand, in the same way they understand risks on a battlefield, that there's a world out there that presents some risks for us as well. I think we need to talk about that so that people understand the importance of the conversations we need to have, and don't have a knee-jerk reaction when occasionally a terrible thing might happen that causes us to think in a more isolationist way than is good for our country. I think we need to continue and foster and broaden the dialogue with America so that they understand the importance of diplomacy, they understand that there is sometimes a risk, and that we should accept that risk and continue to be out there about in the world promoting and representing this wonderful country of ours. We've changed everything we've done a million times over, not only because we need to, but because we have the capacity and the ability to do that. What we're doing every day is having tens of thousands of conversations back and forth between other agencies of government who collect information that is certainly useful to us and necessary in real time for us to be able to adequately do the appropriate job on the visa line during those interviews. We also collect that information, share that information on a daily basis. It's remarkable. When I think, okay, I said earlier that we named our first consul in 1790. There's no truth to the rumor that I've been doing this work since then, but I do think, when I think back about my first tour as a vice consul in Mexico City, that relative to how we process information now between other agencies of government and our own, and between a consular section and every port of entry, we, in my day, were using stone knives and bearskins. And now we are, in fact, sort of state of the art, and it never stops. I don't think today I could issue a visa because I would not know how to use that equipment and those systems, and that's a good thing. One of the things we do is require constant training so that everybody who is an active duty consular officer stays up to date and knows how best to use the information we have and the tools we have to do the job. Actually, the first one named was a guy named Palfrey, and he was lost at sea. The first example of how of the dangers of the Foreign Service. So he never made it to France, where he was assigned as consul. A fellow named Barclay followed him shortly after that. But our relationships with Morocco is old and time-honored, and the consulate in Casablanca takes great pride in being sort of one of the first. Probably better when you talk about the State Department writ large than just the Foreign Service itself. I think that it's certainly better than it was when I came in, and everything about that is better than when I came in. Entering the Foreign Service in 1981, there was still a very recent memory of the fact that women Foreign Service officers, if they married, were expected to leave the service. That only ended in, I think, the mid or early 1970s. So that goes away. Then what also goes away is the evaluation of your spouse. How dare they is what we say today, but there was a time when that was also a part of it. I think that we don't see quite as many women yet in the upper echelons as deputy chiefs of mission, as principal officers, as chiefs of mission, but we are making tremendous strides in that direction. And one of the ways that we're also doing that is that we are far better, I'm retired now, but the department is far better at taking care of sort of the family questions, spousal employment issues, getting the kinds of agreements, bilateral agreements with other countries. Your spouses can work here, our spouses can work there. And of course, times have changed. The internet. People's careers are far more portable than they were. 20 and 30 years ago, where it doesn't matter where you sit if you're editing something. Does it matter where you sit if you're a writer? There are whole careers that are made sort of portable simply by use of the internet. And so that's also a tremendous thing and really has been, I think, a tremendous help to the Foreign Service. No, I think it's a mistake to sort of to broad brush that question. We have some extraordinarily talented non-career colleagues, and we have some extraordinarily untalented Foreign Service officers. You know, it just really does run both ways. When I think about my career and I think of some of the non-career people it has been my great privilege to work closely with, and I think of George Shultz and Warren Christopher and Madeleine Albright and Colin Powell. What are we talking about? We're talking about the cream of the crop. Now, I know you're probably thinking about non-career ambassadors, and I've had the chance to meet some really profoundly talented, interested, directive non-career ambassadors, and of course career ambassadors the same way, but neither the career nor the non-career folks have a lock on talent or the lack thereof.